Hello friends, my name is Nupur. I work with Center for Social Justice. The Center for Social Justice is a legal empowerment organization. We have our presence in 12 states. In some states we have a direct presence, and in some other states we work through our partners. Our key focus is on using law for social change. Many of you are studying human rights, and the purpose of the session today is to look at how law is being actually applied in practice. What are the different strategies that you use when you are fighting for the human rights of the people? How exactly is it that you can ensure that people get their rights? What are the challenges? What are the difficulties? What are the strategies that work? What are the strategies that don't work? These are some of the aspects that we will look at in this session. The Center for Social Justice journey began almost 20 years back. The point of time when we began, there were very few organizations who were looking at law and its interrelationship between society. We had some examples of individual lawyers who were doing pro bono cases. We had some organizations who were working on women's rights, but there was a huge vacuum when it came to an institutional intervention. And Center for Social Justice at that point of time was designed as an institutional intervention in the field of access to justice. What we try and do is to look at an issue holistically. When I say to look at an issue holistically, it means looking at each and every aspect of that particular issue. So we look at, supposing we are working on the issue of domestic violence, we look at what are the factors that lead to women facing violence. We look at who are the systems which are responsible for ensuring that women don't have to face violence. We look at the laws, what are the laws that are in favor of women or against the women. We look at what are the women's attitudes and law implementers' attitudes. We look at different aspects and try and design an intervention around that. One of our key programs has been about training lawyers. Again, as I said, when we started, the gap was not at the High Court or the Supreme Court level. The gap that was felt was at the level of the district and the taluka, which is where most violations take place. It is a very important breakthrough for us to get a judgment which says that a tribal who does not have money should be released on personal bond. However, remains at the level of the Supreme Court if there is nobody who is ensuring implementation at the ground level. And therefore, the choice that we made was that we will work only with the lawyers from the vulnerable community, and secondly that we will operate much more at the ground level and therefore lower judiciary than at the Supreme Court or the High Court level. When we started, the first thing that we did is to call a meeting of organizations and look at what are their legal empowerment needs. So we ran a paralegal program, and this paralegal program was very effective because women and men who were otherwise not very familiar with law started becoming more aware about their laws, and they were able to identify violations that were happening. However, practically what happened is that when a case would happen, a paralegal would be able to take the case to a particular level. But beyond that, it was important for the lawyer to come into the picture. And that's when we started our fellowship lawyer program. The fellowship lawyer program, as I mentioned earlier, focuses on working on improving the sensitivity and increasing the sensitivity and equipping them with the relevant skills. The legal education in India, as you know, is extremely poor. And what we were faced with was not the task of sensitizing them towards human rights issue. That came very easily. What was more difficult was to start with the ABC of law, because they would not have had even basic education on law despite the degree that they had. So over the years, the program has gone through various facets, various aspects, various ups and downs. But at the moment, the way we are functioning the program is that an individual who comes in the first year, we focus much more on building the self. Therefore, the focus is on letting the person become more confident, understanding how the person is a victim of or a perpetrator of discrimination, looking at the larger picture. What is the larger picture in which we are just players, and what we are doing, how it is contributing to the larger picture. So that's the focus on the first year. For us, what we have made compulsory is that all lawyers have to, in the first year, work as paralegals. And somewhere we have changed the dynamics. So instead of saying that paralegals are assistants of lawyers, or of saying that paralegals are a degree lesser than the lawyers, we have said that a good social justice lawyer is somebody who can play the role of a paralegal very, very well. So that's the focus in the first year. In the second year, we start focusing on the lawyering skills, and therefore in the first year they have done caught up on the reading that they don't essentially have, etc. In the second year, they start appearing in the court with the assistance of a senior lawyer. So in our system, we always have young, mid-level and senior lawyers. Senior lawyers, we've realized that as a person starts getting better at the bar, because they also have personal needs, so their contribution to the organization starts becoming lesser. So instead of looking at it as a negative, we have designed the exit and the entry. So therefore you enter as a young lawyer. By the time you are on your feet, you start reducing your time to the organization, but you are available as a resource person for the work of the organization. So that's the pattern that we try and follow. In developing this program, we initially began as doing free cases. So we would have a maintenance case being done free of cost, or we would have small cases being done free of cost. And gradually from there, we have made a shift, and we said that no, this is not about charity. This is about ensuring that there is a power dynamics which is being changed. And therefore, we started focusing on developing their leadership in their community, and also developing their leadership at the bar therefore, we started focusing on developing their leadership at the community as well as at the bar. Experience has been that whenever a new legislation comes in, it is not always that the judiciary has access to it. Our lawyers have always been the first ones to start cases on new legislation. So whether it is Prevention of Domestic Violence Act, or similar legislations, we start introducing, and by doing that, what we start doing is changing the level of lawyering that is happening at the taluka and the district levels. So they become leaders because people who don't have access to these kind of information start looking up to them, and sometimes even judges come and say, okay, can you give us a bare act of this? We don't have a copy. The other thing about this unique about this program is that in our experience, if we look at the number of lawyers whom we have trained, many of them may not be organically linked with the organization, but they contribute to the local situation independently also. So, for example, I got a case once which was a very well fought case at the ground level, and the case had come to us at the High Court, and I said, okay, who has fought this case? And I was surprised to find that it was one of our law students who had been trained by us, who had fought that case very well and lost it and referred the matter to us. The point that I am making is that an investment into a person from the community will never be wasted. You may leave that person may leave the organization, but the community is never going to leave that individual, and therefore that person becomes a resource for the community. There are always some people who have not been up to the mark, and so that's in the larger scheme of things that happens, and one has to accept that is how the reality is. But largely the success of the program is that our lawyers have taken up neutral kind of practices. So they will be doing negotiable instruments, or they will be doing bank cases or things like that, but never be fighting on behalf of a rapist or for an employer. So that I think is the success of our program. So when we started doing this program, we started differentiating the kind of issues that were coming. So from being a fellowship program where we had individual lawyers, we started looking at a set of them and accompanied by paralegals, setting up a district unit. So when I said CSJ has been set up as an institutional model, that is what I meant. So essentially the concept is that in an institutional model, you have people with varied skills who come together and try and identify the areas of the issues of that particular areas, and then respond to that. So if we look at our whole expanse, Bharuch is a district where we work in. where industrial labor is very high, and therefore that unit responds much more to issues of labor than another area where the issues of land may be very high. So we started differentiating in the time of so we started differentiating on the type of the issues that we were responding to. With the result, we had a very varied variety of cases that we had responded to, and that gave us the ability to be able to influence different discourses about policy changes or about changes in law, because in some one unit or the other that experience would have been there. What we have is a very varied type of cases that we are addressing, and the result is that because of that we have different experiences which allow us to influence different types of policies. So we are not restricted to a particular issue or a particular theme. Access to justice is the common thread for us, and the constituency keeps varying. If there's a discussion happening on the social security laws, we have an experience from one center. On domestic violence, we have experience from another center. So that is what. The principle that we follow is that any work that you do at the grassroots has to lead to a policy intervention, and if you have not done work at the grassroots, you don't intervene at the policy level. There's a simple principle that we follow. That is the simple principle that we follow. So this is what we call the grassroots to the policy approach. Now, in order to operationalize this approach, what does it mean? It means that when you enter an area, you look at the local situation. So you make an assessment. You make an assessment about what is the situation of people vis-a-vis that law. Are they aware of the law? Is the law being implemented or not? What are the different stakeholders' opinions about that law and their own level of information about that law? Having done that assessment, you start with awareness. Now, awareness is something that you can do using different medium. The simplest being door-to-door visits, because that is the most powerful way of doing that, and in that process you build a personal relationship which goes a long way in when you actually start an intervention. Your village visits could be targeted or general, both. When I say a targeted village visit, that means you have decided after an assessment that this particular village we need to identify claims of a particular type. So it could be for instance non-payment of wages under NREGA. It could be that, or it could be non-entry of mutation, non-recording of, or it could be not updating the revenue records. You could look at that as a very specific thing on which you want to work. A general visit is when you enter a village with an open mind and talk to people to identify what their needs are. So we do both general as well as targeted village visits. In terms of awareness, we use local media. So if there's a local folk form which is existing, like Tamasha, we modify the script to look at legal issues. Or if there is a Geet Mandli that is there, or Bhajan Mandli that is there, we reword the song so that the messages that they are giving are actually legal messages. Wall writing, of course, is a very simple method that we all use always. Getting children to participate in awareness programs. So the children take out rallies, or we do events with the children who organize programs about legal awareness. So that becomes another way of doing that. We have a community radio where tribals themselves have set up a community radio process. The entire team is of Adivasis, and they do the recording, they do the processing, and that is then aired at the All India Radio. So that is another method that you can use. We show films in the night, and a very powerful method is to target local hearts, because that is one space where people are going to come irrespective of whether you are there or not. So if there is an urs happening, if there's a mela happening, if there's a haat happening, you try and set up a stall there, or you do a street theater there, and people, because they are there in any case, they become easily accessible to you, and you don't have to spend energy in reaching out to them in different methods. So that is how we do awareness. Now, obviously, once the awareness levels have increased, people will have claims. So we set up a mechanism of recording claims and following it up. Now, if we have 50 claims of a particular type and we follow it up with the government, it automatically leads to an understanding of where processes are being stuck. So it could be that the budgets are not flowing in. It could be that the particular authority is not aware of their roles and responsibilities. It could be simple apathy. It could be a very clear case of discrimination against a particular religion or against a particular caste. So we identify these blocks and then we advocate for removal of these blocks. So I will give you two case studies which clearly demonstrate this principle that I am talking about. So for example, first if I talk to you about the sharecroppers. Sharecroppers, as you know, are people who live on the farm owner's land, do work for him, and then as and when the crop gets sold, they get a share in that. So that is what the sharecropping system is about. Now it's a very exploitative system because it's not just the man who is employed by the farm owner, it's also the entire family. So the woman would be expected to go and fetch water, children would be expected to go and do some odd jobs, etc., etc. And if there's a crop failure, then there's no money that comes to these people, and they just have to manage with whatever food has been given to them while they were on that particular farmer's fields. So that this becomes a very exploitative system. Now we studied this and it became, so first year getting in touch with them, identifying them, because these would all be people who would be on different people's farms. So how does one get in touch with them? Interactions with many of them led to an understanding that on Kartik Mela they all come back home and they gather at one particular place. So we realized that if we have to reach out to them, then simplest is to target the Kartik Mela. So we started targeting the Kartik Melas and then started talking to them about what their rights are, what are they, what should they fight for, etc., etc. So these people then realized that what is happening is very wrong and there's an option. Up till now they had to suffer that because there was no option. Once we told them there is an option available, they said that yes, we would like to fight back. And then we started insisting that you start insisting on maintaining records. So when you are going, have something in writing, have postcards which become proof that you were there, etc., etc. So we started putting up these cases before the Labour Commissioner. Now what was happening was that because the place of the office of the Labour Commissioner was 60 kilometers away and people had to spend money to reach there. Many of them backed out because that meant that extra expenses, that meant loss of daily wages and things like that. So what we did is that asked the Labour Commissioner that since large majority of them are located in this place, in this location called Khet Brahma, instead of them, all of them having to come there, why can't you have weekly sittings at their place? So they agreed for that, and that was a big victory because it's not just about being able to access a mechanism better, it's also in a manner it also reinforces your own personal struggle. It gives you confidence that yes, something is possible to be done. So this was a very big victory for us, that the offices shifted to the place where the tribals were there. Now subsequent to that, we again continued doing individual cases, and then we realized that this particular type of work is not listed under the Minimum Wages Act. So we did postcard campaign and we sent thousands of postcards saying that why is this not listed under the Minimum Wages Act, because a parallel system called Satya is listed. So because of this postcard campaign, there was a notification where they said that yes, these people would also be covered under the Minimum Wages Act, and this was done by a lawyer who's from the community. He's an Adivasi himself, has not gone to big law schools, but he was able to move this much. So that's the impact that investing in the community lawyers can have. The other example that I would like to share with you would be about the way we went about implementing the PWDVA, which is the Prevention of Domestic Violence Act. Now, PWDA was a legislation which came after a lot of lobbying by a lot of women's groups, and it was passed. Now, in Gujarat, our lawyers were the first ones who started filing cases under the PWDVA. Now, surprisingly, when we started filing cases, the judges were not aware of the law, so we had to provide them the bare acts. Not just that, they would ask, for instance, they would say, now if you have filed a case of maintenance under 125 CRPC, you withdraw that case if you want to file that. This is like completely contrary to the law, which says that both the cases can run parallelly. To be our first our first effort was to increase filing so that there is an experience which can help us to build a case for changes and for implementation. The first thing that we did is to start increasing the filing, because the experience would give us what are the spaces where the law is not working well, and then we could ask for changes or for better implementation. We did about 64 cases and we did an analysis of those cases. The analysis very clearly showed several things. One was that the specified duration under the act was not being followed. So notices were not given in 3 days, cases were not disposed of in 60 days. The second was the lack of awareness amongst the judges themselves, who did not know how to process certain things when they would come up before the court. So for instance, if the protection officer has not filed a report, the act says that the judge may. It does not say the judge shall, but they would keep waiting for the protection officer's report and the case would keep getting delayed. So we did a very systematic study and it came out that the lack of appointment of protection officers was a critical factor in the act not being implemented. So we filed a public interest litigation in the High Court and asked for implementation of the act. So the court gave orders, budgets were allocated and protection officers were appointed. Simultaneously, we also circulated our study to the registrar and to all the district judges. And our happiest moment was that on the 8th of March, which is the Women's Day, in many places they organized, because they were expected to organize 8th March programs. In many other places, the judges actually used the report that we had submitted to them. Stating the situation of domestic violence and the implementation of act and stuff like that. Now, what we managed to also do is to get a judicial protocol issued by the High Court. So that became a very powerful tool, because whenever there would be a counter argument, we would say, see, we are not saying this. There's a judicial protocol to this which we are asking you to implement. So that also became a very, very powerful. क्या हुआ?
Just checking audio.
Okay. So yeah. So we would say that no.
And down.
Okay. So we would say.
Look at the camera.
Okay. So we would say that this is not what we are saying. This is what the judicial protocol says. This case study also shows another thing. It is showing that on the one hand we have been very aggressive in terms of demanding implementation, in terms of challenging the way the judiciary is functioning, and at the same time we have also been very collaborative. So when we do a joint program with the district judges, or when we do the training program for the judges or for the protection officers, which we were asked to do, we are also collaborating. Many often we make the mistake of saying that you can either be anti-state or you can either be pro-state. In both these case studies, what we have done is engaged with the state, sometimes taken an offensive path and sometimes taken a collaborative path, and that is something, a very important thing that we need to understand. What I will now tell you about is the research component that went into both these case studies, and is something that we follow in all the researches that we do. The difference between the typical social researches and the way we do research is essentially the frame that we follow. We follow what we call the entitlement versus availability frame. Let me give you an example. If a social worker is designing a study on, say, implementation of Right to Education Act, a probable way of designing the study could be, for instance, what is the distance of the school from your house? More than 3 kilometers, more than 6 kilometers, more than 10 kilometers. This interval could have been determined by the sense of comfort that people have about how near the school has to be. When we are doing the research, we will very clearly say it is either more than 2 kilometers or less than 2 kilometers, because the law requires that it has to be at the distance of 2 kilometers. That is what I call when I say what is entitlement versus availability framework. You mark and you map not general understanding of the situation, but very clearly violations of what the law is saying. In using this frame, we are all In using this frame, we are always looking at three aspects. What is it that the policy or the law is saying? Is it adequate? Is it taking into account people's need? Or is it blank, silent on certain aspects? Or is it actually contrary to the needs of the people and bad for the vulnerable people? That's the first level of assessment that we do. If a policy or law is something that is inadequate, then we try and ensure to raise then we make an effort to raise the bar of the policy. Just to give you an example, we had a situation where we had floods, where the policy said that the compensation would be given at the rate of some 1963 GR, whereas we had an instance of earthquake which gave much higher amounts of money to be paid by the government. So our intervention was to ensure that the bar of entitlement is raised for the flood affected people. It could be that that the law is bad per se and is bad for the people. Then we need to challenge that. So, for example, then we need to challenge that if the law by itself is not addressing the needs of the people or is adversely affecting the lives of the people, then we need to challenge that. The second step to this frame is to look at the extent of implementation, and a key component in this becomes the institutions. So, we make an assessment of what is the status of the institutions that are responsible for implementation. Is it that, because many a times there are systemic errors which lead to non-implementation. Just to give you an example, the whole issue of under trials, if we look at that, the fact that there is not sufficient police jatha leads to the fact that the under trials are not produced before the court, and then they languish in the jail without any practical solution coming to their cases. We started looking at what can be done about that and what is a systemic solution to this. And we said that at least once a week the judge will visit the court and then look at these offences and run the trial there. Now this becomes a systemic solution which is like not constantly questioning the state, but looking at where their reality is and finding solutions to ensure that the rights of the people are met. The second thing that we look at is that what is the attitude that these people have. For example, I have attended a meeting of judges where the opening sentence of in the inauguration was that all women file false cases. Now, it clearly shows a negative bias towards women. So, we need to work on the sensitivity, and then we have to convince the role holders that what is the real situation. That could be over an engagement, one-to-one engagement, that could be by producing data which shows the ground realities, that could be over training programs. But where there is insensitivity, we have to find ways of ensuring that sensitization is done. A major problem is often that of vacancies. So, a health system is not functioning well because 30% understaffing is there. In jail administration, there is 30% understaffing. So, trying to ensure that the system has the relevant number of personnel that is required, and that has sometimes led to PILs, and we have got orders where we have been given orders that the talatis who are responsible for birth registrations have to be appointed in a particular location. So, these are the kind of things that we try and work at. In the end, what I will try to share with you is that we have to look at things holistically, because it's not possible to intervene in a situation looking at only one particular aspect. We have to understand all forces that act upon a situation and try and address each one of them individually as well as collectively. Secondly, what is important is to be aware of the power of the collective, because very often when you try and look at individual cases, you will not be able to make much progress. But the moment you try and convert individual issues into a collective problem, the people will be much more with you and come forward to fight for their cases. The third thing which is very important is that preciseness and sharpness. Very often we have instances where social movements have not looked at law as a very clear component in their strategies, and therefore their demands are devoid of that understanding. We have to be very clearly aware of what are the laws and whether they are supporting or not supporting us, and design our strategies and interventions around that aspect. Fourthly, collaboration is very important. To believe that we can work independently without relating with other stakeholders is a myth, and we need to get out of our individual choices, our individual preferences, and come towards a collective larger goal. I think it's time that civil society organizations came together to respond to different issues rather than working on things individually.